better times. And I think the better times to come will not the least be, as later on will try to explain in my address, which comes later during the program today, because of the existence and the effectiveness of the patent system. But having said this, my personal history with COVID-19 was a little bit funny, really. My daughter is a journalist, and that I come in a minute to. I came on the 15th of January 2020 back from China. I had my last dinner on the 14th of January with two professors of Wuhan at Shanghai, and I flew to Munich. And since then, I did not leave Europe anymore, which is a little bit difficult for me because my personal professional life consists a lot of interactions with colleagues and friends and clients, of course, also worldwide. Then we came into Germany. Some people came from China, from industry, very close to Munich in a little company. People who did not know that they were sick, they infected other people. And very soon, a month later or 2 months later in April, we could not move freely anymore. We did not know what to do, but there were already signs that certain companies in Germany, which under normal circumstances, one would simply call startups from universities, got money from investors. So startups worked for scientific purposes to develop good products, good medicines, a huge opportunity now in that situation of need. The investors saw, and I would simply say this is what investors in our Western capitalist system have to do, a good chance to earn money. So they invested into these startups a lot of money. Also, of course, governments did so, fortunately, but that was more untypical for a country like Germany, at least. Then summer came. During summer, we all got hope. We heard that certain vaccines are being in development. We heard that certain medicines, traditional ones which have been developed against things like Ebola and you name it. I myself a physicist, I'm not a pharmacologist, I'm not a chemist, but I know that from newspaper and of my talks with other people, etc. China was developing a vaccine. Russia was very advanced. I think in August last year, they had the first vaccinations being done in Russia already with Sputnik V. And we had the usually slow procedures for admission purposes, etc., in Europe, particularly also hampered by national, I would say, interests of various countries, not to let companies in certain countries getting quicker progress in terms of coming closer to production than in other countries. So we have a European agency for that, which interesting enough gives the EMA gives the testing, the trial authorities to certain member countries. It's all a little bit of a difficult secret to understand. But anyway, then on the 2nd of October last year, my daughter, the journalist, wrote to me. She writes for many German newspapers and said, did you read already that South Africa and India have filed a motion to the WTO IPR waiver for vaccines and drugs, etc.? And I felt startled. I contacted immediately Anthony Taubman and his deputy at WTO Intellectual Property Office and said, you certainly will be in charge of preparing the further procedures here in Geneva, with whom I've, with that institution, very often already talked. And I said, may I remind you a little bit of the importance of the patent system and all these things. And I agreed with them that I should in detail a little bit write down my own position, which I did. Namely telling them that the patent system is the only instrument promised to the people of the world by Article 7 TRIPS in its original form of 1995, namely to enhance the possibility and promote technology transfer, which is the justification for having the possibility to erect a fence around innovations, particularly also in pharma, against unauthorized use by others, and therefore promoting investment into R&D. This is the purpose of TRIPS at the end of the day. Why should the developing world, why should emerging economies accept a strong patent system, particularly for pharmaceuticals otherwise? But there is this provision of the door, Article 7 TRIPS, for sharing. So the intellectual property rights, like the patent system as such, to create innovations by soliciting investment into R&D, and the door, according to Article 7, to share it with others. And I said to the IPO, those intellectual property office people at WTO, don't forget this when you deal with this question here. And I think now at the moment, that was in early October, the patent system proves that it is saving the world, so to say, namely by making vaccines available, creating them first. And now the question is whether the door will function. Article 7, TRIPS, and the consequences derived therefrom. I have then followed the discussion in great detail, particularly also with the German Ministry for Economy and Energy, where I belong to a kind of an advisory board. And as you know, Germany's position in this regard, I'm not the government, but I have the pleasure from time to time to be asked in these questions. And I certainly said, don't agree, please, or try to prevent that the European Union will not agree simply to the IPR waiver proposal. And I tell you why. And later on, I will more elaborate on this. Let's look into the patent system as such, and I think there are the remedies already embedded into it. And I had the pleasure, particularly during the last few weeks, to come into a very intensive dialogue with my dear old friend, Prabhuda Ganguly. Professor Ganguly is an old friend of mine from the time when I was working on my PhD at Mainz University in Germany, and he was working on his PhD in different institutes. And we are in a permanent dialogue and try to coordinate our thoughts in a somehow a little bit unconventional manner, but all with the same aim. And I would like to focus on that and then finish my opening address. We all agree, I think everybody, that vaccines of this type, medicaments of this type, helping against such a disease must be made available as quickly as possible in whatever quantities it needs all over the world at locally affordable conditions. We all agree on that. And I would say also in a country like Germany, where our government takes a position largely influencing the EU's position. Of course, German economy is about at 40% of the GDP of the whole European Union. Everybody wishes that these vaccines become available. Later on, we'll have to see what should one do for this. One remark, and I would like to end with this. If you look into the patent statistics, for example, in Europe, but you can also take other countries, most, at least a very large number of the patents on COVID fighting medicaments and vaccines are held, for example, by startup, similar to startup companies like in Germany, like in other parts of the world. There are already existing license agreements. When we all talk in the world, I must always laugh when I listen to my US friends. We call a certain vaccine the BioNTech vaccine. They call it the Pfizer vaccine. Yeah, why? There is, of course, some kind of a license agreement, of a cooperation agreement, which provides, of course, based on the patent rights these international cooperation partners are using, on something like licensing. And licensing always means to give permittance on one side, but also to get some, hopefully reasonable, justified, well negotiated royalty for that, to get something back for what you have invested into R&D. And it would be curious to know how the present agreements, which I don't know, between licensors and licensees in this field are distributed. I only know one thing as a lawyer, as a patent attorney. If there is no patent anymore, there will be no payment anymore. And then you can see where possibly mass production of vaccines takes place at the moment, based on agreements, and where the money might not necessarily be flowing anymore if there is no patent for a certain period of time? I don't know, but these are all questions related to that. Again, we all wish to make these vaccines available. We have to discuss mechanisms, how to do this. I personally believe the patent system can do it if one has a robust public use and compulsory licensing systems, which certain countries like India, fortunately, or Thailand, or Brazil, or Germany have, which other countries, for example, across the Atlantic from Europe, not necessarily have. And let's see what we can do about all this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Professor Hans Godard, for his very thoughtful opening remarks. And we will hear him in detail about his views on grant of the waiver for the cause of humanity. In the meanwhile, I invite our learned guest speaker of this evening, Mr. Harish Subramaniam, the founding and managing partner of Subramaniam and Associates, to give his presentation. Sir, so I am enabling you to share your screen.
Good afternoon and good evening, as the case may be, to all of you. Good to see many friends here today, Dr. Agarwal. Thanks for bringing everybody here together during this evening. Good to see Dr. Godard, with whom I have conducted some workshops in the past in India. Great to see Prabhuda Ganguly. He and I have indulged in a lot of slugfest, several contentious proceedings where he has given me run for money, made me sweat all the time, and of course, made me become a good attorney. Very happy to see my good friend Rowan, who looks after my clients' interests in whole of Africa, including South Africa, and of course, glad to have somebody like of eminence like Mr. Raghavendra, Joint Secretary from Ministry of Law and Justice, who is a very important person to be here today and in seminars like this, because there are a lot of changes and requirements as we go forward with respect to not only IPR law but general law in general. I am going to be talking more about the good and bad of a IPR waiver rather than a governmental position. I have been known to be a very pro patent attorney, although I have in my time knocked off several patents because I also believe that bad patents should not remain on the register of patents. But there are times where patent system is required for progress of technology, for awareness and availability of technology, and history has shown that a strong patent regime always ends up in a very strong technology base in a country. At the same time, there are certain relaxations that laws of each country provides for ensuring that in an emergency situation, the government has certain powers to invoke certain provisions, and so does the public to invoke certain provisions for the safety and the welfare of the mankind. There are also inbuilt provisions in most legislatures of the world, not only in the developing countries but also in developed nations, to prevent abuse of monopoly right. So if you balance rights along with provisions for preventing abuse of monopoly rights, then I think a patent system is a very, very good thing to have for the progress of not only technology, but for the welfare of mankind. Dr. Agarwal, you need to enable me to share the screen.
I've already enabled, sir. Please try.
No, it still says I am disabled. So you got to enable the participant screen sharing. It says host has disabled the participant screen sharing. So you need to go to the screen sharing and enable the host. Hand over the hosting to me. That's perfect now.
Okay.
No, now you need to stop sharing so that I can. So you need to we are seeing your screen. Yeah, now this is great. Perfect. All right. So let's see where it all started. Just give me a second. The whole, as Dr. Agarwal pointed out, everything started in October 2020, really, when India, along with South Africa, made a representation before the WTO seeking IPR waiver, not just for vaccines, but for all technologies necessary to combat the current pandemic. And it took a long time. A lot of countries, particularly from the developed world, were startled at this. But 6 months down the line, USA has agreed to pursue negotiations with WTO for waiver of IPR in COVID vaccine. And also in May 2021, countries such as Canada, South Korea, Bangladesh have also shown interest in manufacturing vaccine if they can get IPR waiver. I'm not sure how that would really help Bangladesh. At the cost of making a politically incorrect statement, I'm not really sure if Bangladesh still has the capacity to really manufacture world-class vaccines if the IPR or waiver happens, and not that Bangladesh has a very strong IPR protection. But I guess, in principle, yes, it's happy that they are backing other countries. UK and European Union have also, in principle, have agreed to back USA. But we need to know where that really leads us. Now the question is, then there comes the million-dollar question. Are we really talking about only IPRs as the impediment to free access to drugs? In the present context, are IPRs really a hurdle at all? Or are they required? It's very easy for us to get emotional and say, "Oh, surely there should be no patent. Everything should be available to everybody free of cost, or even at a low cost. But there should be no patent at all." We need to examine what kind of world that would lead to if there were no patents at all. Apart from patents, we also have other trade embargoes that happen, restrictions, even on a lot of patent-free APIs, reagents, kits, etc. There are also a lot of political embargoes that happen. The most important thing that happened during the early COVID pandemic last year was about hydroxychloroquine, when the Trump administration made a huge demand on India to make a huge supply to them at the cost of actually threatening India that if all the hydroxychloroquine were not supplied to them, there will be other trade sanctions. So it's not just the IPRs, but there are also some politics that play and a very important role in the entire system. We are talking about IPRs. What kind of IPRs are we talking about? Vaccines are only part of that. Vaccines are for prevention, but you also need, despite vaccines, there are going to be people who are infected and you need to have drugs for proper treatment. Right now, although several drugs have been used for COVID treatment, more and more evidence shows that there are really no drugs for treatment of COVID. We need drugs too. New process for manufacture, more economically viable processes for manufacture. Probably there are some existing drugs which can be used, which have been attempted, like ivermectin, like hydroxychloroquine, like remdesivir, but they only have shown mixed activity against COVID. We do not know for sure that we are there, combination therapies, then we need diagnostic kits, reagents, there's so many of them. When we talk about this IPR waiver, and I know that Pfizer and AstraZeneca, amongst many other pharma companies, were thoroughly started. And they made a joint representation before Joe Biden's administration only a couple of months ago, saying that, look, please don't do it. It's undermining the global response to pandemic. It's also going to create obstacles for ongoing efforts to tackle new variants, create barriers to information sharing. Now, they all seem very vague statements, but they have a lot of good points behind them, and it's important for us to examine them as well. The biggest question that arises is today, let's assume, now let me focus myself from India's point of view, for the simple reason I do not consider myself competent to make a global statement with regard to IPR waiver in other countries. Because what I know about other countries is based on a little experience and mostly reading. But as far as India is concerned, I can speak with some authority. Now, we do know that India has one of the largest generic bases, and it's also one of the biggest suppliers to the African region. And not just to the African region, India also supplies a very low cost but a very high quality APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, all over the world. But that, and believe me, that really does not mean that every generic company in India have the wherewithal or the capability to prepare or produce quality vaccines. Vaccines are an entirely different kind of ball game. It is not preparing a generic drug. A drug doesn't work, you have an alternative. If a drug doesn't work for some time, the effect is not lifelong. But a bad vaccine, a badly prepared vaccine, or a vaccine where the microorganism which is often used is not attenuated enough, it can precipitate the very calamity it is intended to avert. And it can turn into a monster, and it can be a lifelong, life-threatening monster growing inside you. So we do not know. The vaccines are something that have to be very, very carefully monitored. That's precisely the reason for a very, very long time, many governments did not give approvals to pharma companies to prepare vaccines for HIV, which would have meant injecting into human beings attenuated virus, and which could have been disastrous. Vaccines, just because IPR is waived, does not mean every company in the world will be able to produce quality vaccines. To generally look at the global players, look at the number of companies which manufacture drugs, the number of companies which even manufacture anti-cancer drugs. But if you look at the number of companies who are really investing in vaccines, they are microscopic compared to the general numbers in the world. And the few Indian companies which are capable of producing world-class vaccine are already producing them today and making them available in India because of a very low cost and a very well price regulated vaccination program and licensing program. And that is working extremely well. So therefore, for the vaccines and we just gave, if you look at the kind of population India is faced with, and if you look at the magnitude of the vaccination program, that is frightening. But if you look at the number of vaccinations that have already taken place, including those having the second dose, that is mind-boggling as well. And those have been made possible by a handful of pharma companies in India which have actually produced vaccines. But waiving the IPR is not going to increase that number, nor keeping the IPR is going to reduce that number. Now, let me just talk about a lesson that I have personally learned we should learn from the HIV retroviral programs. Now, I have been involved in defending, and my colleagues as well, in defending Gilead's major HIV retrovirals ever since 1995, ever since the day we signed the dotted line under the TRIPS agreement. That was the time when Gilead had really come with amazingly effective retroviral drugs, while anybody who was infected with HIV was consigned to death almost immediately. They actually gave hope of a lifelong, well managed expectancy of several years. I was dealing with this drug called propyl methoxyadenosine phosphate, PMPA, and the improved bioavailable version called BISPOC PMPA carbamate. Patents were granted for them in every single country that Gilead had applied for, except in India, in spite of the fact that we just had gone into a product patent regime. And every attempt to get a patent, every kind of argument where I was involved in, and using the minutest of the skills that I can draw from all the past experience did not work, because I was told that by several leading controllers unofficially, and with a promise that I will not quote them by name, that they were given instructions from the top not to grant patents for HIV drugs. Well, I certainly really appreciate the government's attempt, because the purpose was noble. Purpose was to make the drug freely accessible and available in India at a low cost. In one of the patent oppositions, where I was representing Gilead on this, I was garrowed in the patent office by over 150 HIV patients who threatened to stab me with syringes with their blood. And of course, that did happen. I conducted opposition, I argued the case. And of course, I did not win because of the governmental policy. The matter went on appeal. For some reason or other, appellate board would never hear that particular matter, but will hear everything else. So clearly, there was a reason. The reason was noble. But did it work? It did not work, because in spite of there being no valid patent in India for the retroviral drug, most pharmaceutical companies in India, practically none except Cipla, were in a position to manufacture them. And even Cipla did not invest too much of money in it. 9 companies who finally decided to manufacture the HIV drug, this for PMPA, they all took license from Gilead at a very low rate, royalty rate, but still everybody was happy. Gilead was happy too, because they got a royalty and the technology and patent was accepted. The reason why? The reason is very simple. Just because you hand over a patent specification to a generic company does not mean they are in a position to really manufacture. Need the technological know-how. You need to have quality APIs available. You need to have quality manufacturing facilities. You need to have the ability to have excellent FDA approvals. And you need to also have the ability to conduct clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So therefore, in spite of the fact that for HIV retrovirals, we did not grant patent protection, and although the appeals are still pending, Indian companies did not manufacture so much except with the license from Gilead. So ultimately, what has happened? 9 companies in India have the capacity to make HIV drugs, and we have thousands of generics. They don't have the technology. Had the patent been there and had patent been respected and had it been given to everyone licensed, I am sure it would have been a different story at this point of time. When you come back to COVID, as of today, India does not have a single patent for a COVID vaccine, although no granted patent. But there are several pending applications. I myself have overseen over 50 at least, and many of them are from Indian companies, few Indian generic companies who already have the vaccine production capacity and who already have licenses from AstraZeneca. and they also have their own patent application. They seem very, very promising. As of today, only one Indian vaccine invented in India has received a DCGI's approval. Let's assume that we say no patents, everything is free. Then what happens then? We need to understand that vaccine is not an anti-infective. Like I said, it acts on the patient's immune system. And vaccine manufacture requires a state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities, which not all generic companies, I'm not only talking about in India, all over the world, do not possess that. So therefore, if we believe that IPR waiver will increase the vaccine production in India, no, that's not going to happen. And that's my personal view. It is more important today that India fights for TRIPS-related waivers of import restrictions rather than IPR waivers of blanket waiver. All medicines currently used for COVID-19 treatment are existing drugs for other indications. New use of a known drug is anyway not patent eligible in India. And where necessary, why don't we use our own inbuilt safety valves that we have? We have an excellent system of compulsory licensing provisions. Mr. Kurian is not here, or I mean, at least he was not here when I started. He created history all over the world and also heartaches and fluttered. Lot of flutters when he granted compulsory license for Nexvar, the anti-cancer drug of Bayer, because he did not trash away the patent. He did not say the patent was worthless. He upheld the validity of the patent. He acknowledged the innovation. But what he stopped while granting patent right was abuse of the monopoly right. So he made sure that a drug which was available to a patient at US dollars 5,500 per month was made available at US dollars 180 200 per month, which is perfect. So which is a great situation. Now let us assume we also have several pre-grant oppositions. I have used that several times to ensure that bad patents do not come on the register. And we have post-grant opposition. We do not grant patents for incremental inventions. So why don't we use all that? Let us also understand a most important monster that is hiding behind us right now. Do we know anything about the COVID vaccines today? Do we even understand their efficacy, their long-term toxicity, their toxicology? We do know anything about how they are going to play in a human body. Have we forgotten the thalidomide thing? Almost all of us were born when the thalidomide disaster exploded. I'm so thankful that our mothers did not take thalidomide when they were pregnant. Otherwise, we would have all been born with all kinds of deformities. But those after effect of a tiny pill which was given for morning sickness for pregnant women turned out to be a monster later. Today, we do not know what the vaccines are doing inside our body. Probably there's a time bomb ticking inside us. We do not know. So let us assume that there is a time bomb. Or let's assume that the current vaccines are not as efficacious as they are. Or let us assume that they are completely useless. Or let's assume that they are absolutely poisonous. We do not know. All these possibilities are a real possibility, not conjectures, which would mean that going forward, we would need better medicines, better vaccines, improvements, and also we would need better medicines to treat people who have been adversely affected by vaccines. Where are they going to come from? Not if you ground the pharma companies and tell them no patent for you. The pharma companies really invest in a huge amount of money. More than 80% of the new drugs actually fail during the clinical trials. And sometimes after clinical trials, sometimes after they're in the market, we do not know. As we would know in the last few months, European Union actually blocked AstraZeneca's vaccine for some time because it had shown some adverse effect. For all you know, it may have to be withdrawn next year. For all you know, Pfizer vaccine might have been withdrawn next year. So where do we go? So you need to, if there is no money for pharma company for their innovation, who is going to innovate for us in the future? The pandemic has not gone. and the pandemic is not once in a lifetime. The mastermind can keeps exploding, the human population keeps exploding. As we become more and more responsible in many ways, there are going to be new viruses, new mutants, new variants, and you need to have a cure for all of them. And the blanket waiver of IPR means that no pharma company who also exists for their personal profit are not going to invest their money into their system to create new vaccines which are not going to produce any income for them. It will be a loss for them. So therefore, let us still make sure there is no complete IPR waiver of pharma vaccines, of COVID vaccines, and let us regulate them and let us prevent abuse of monopoly rights with compulsory licenses and low royalties. I think that's a better option. And with this, say thank you for the patient listening. And I know I expressed some strong views, but they are mine. I hope they are well taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Subramaniam. Only on your conclusion, I'd just like to ask a very small question to you that compulsory licensing as per the Indian patent law, whether under section 92 or 100, can be invoked only if the patent has been either granted in India or has been at least applied for in India. Section 92 can be invoked only if a patent has been granted, and 100 can be invoked only when a patent has been applied for. But Pfizer, Johnson, Moderna, none has applied for patent in India. So how can we invoke the compulsory licensing provision?
That's why I talked about the HIV story. We need to reflect back and do a bit of introspection and wonder why they have not applied for patents in India. And who is the loser at this point of time? 70 years after independence, we are still talking about, we are not in a position to innovate. Other pharma companies had a free right to innovate. And it's time that we did. But if you want innovations to come into India, if we want to have more and more technology access coming into India, I guess we need to tell the world that we are a patent-friendly country and we are going to grant good patents. The only reason Pfizer and AstraZeneca and Moderna and other people have not applied for the patents is because, let me tell you something, ever since Novartis's Gleevec or Gilead's PMPA drugs, tenofovir and Viriad and all those patents were, and even Tamiflu, were denied patents. I must talk about Tamiflu, which was a bird flu thing. On one hand, the patent office refuses it on the ground that it is not an efficacious drug. On the same day, they refused, the Indian newspapers published a story from the government saying that that's the most efficacious drug available in India today. So why are they all pulling out? And why are they all not filing patent applications today? If you look at the number of patent filings all over the world, more than 300,000 a year, and we are still stuck at 45. Why? It's because we are not giving a very positive idea to people. We are not sending a very positive message. Once we become more patent friendly, I'm sure. Now, let's answer your question. Yes, they have not applied for a patent in India, which means they are free for us to copy. So if we have the ability, let's copy. Nobody's stopping them. So on one hand, we are talking about such a strong generic company base. If they are so good, then let them copy. Because there is no patent here, so we are free to copy them, right?
Right, that is okay. But here it's a question of the IPR package, because simply copying the formulation will not help. You need the technology, you need the raw material, you need the health products. So without medical devices, so here since this is a international health pandemic situation. So it's an exceptional situation. We can blame the Indian Patent Office, the Indian patent law, the Indian government, that there is enough time for that. But today, it's a question not only for the Indian people, but for the entire global community.
But there we are treading on a path which is beyond my expertise, because that's a governmental negotiation. That has really nothing to do with IPR as such. So therefore, I would refrain from commenting on that, because we have experts from the government who would be able to answer that question better and who are more equipped and really much more competent to address that issue. because that will be done only through negotiations with other government and of course prevailing over them. And even today, for the kind of waiver we have applied before the WTO, yes, I know more than 60 countries have asked for it and agreed, but a single country can actually act as a veto as well out of 160 countries. So there's a long haul exercise over there. So we cannot wait for that. Just one country can refuse. Therefore, I think a more at a governmental level negotiation is necessary than on a legal level under the patents law or the IPR law.
Thank you, sir, for very detailed and very analytical views expressed by you. I really convey my sincere thanks to you for such a wonderful discussion and the deliberation you had on this contemporary issue. Sir, we should welcome the chairman APEDA. Chairman APEDA, Dr. Arumangam is here. So, can you unmute yourself, sir, for just for a second? Arumugam sir, Chairman APEDA, we welcome you, sir. Now, we request our another guest speaker, Mr. G.R. Raghavendra, Joint Secretary, Government of India, Ministry of Law and Justice, Department of Justice. So over to Mr. Raghavendra, please.
Good evening, everyone. Namaskar and respected Dhanpatram Agarwal ji, the head of the GIPC, and Professor Heinz Godar and Hari Subramaniam ji, and my friend Professor Ganguly, and all other distinguished panelists and audience who are attending this excellently drawn and focused topic, that is TRIPS IPR waiver for the COVID pandemic medicines and pharmaceutical products. The reason why India joined South Africa, I would like to tell you all my views. Despite being a senior officer in the government of India, these are not government of India views, my personal views as a student of intellectual property rights. The reason why I understand that with my experience of negotiating the IPR matters at bilateral level and multilateral level, either it is bilateral investment IPR treaties or various other multilateral treaties, like I was chief negotiator in the Marrakesh Treaty and the Beijing Treaty, and also IPR chapter of the RCEP agreement, which India dropped out later. So wherever I negotiated, keeping in India's interest. So IPR should help to promote access to medicine, access to knowledge, and also development of various industries and employment. Basically focus on public health. You know, the 1970 Patent Act was introduced. The entire idea which new provisions were introduced based on the recommendations from the Section Committee, Iyengar Committee, basically to promote our public health and also promote growth and development of Indian generic pharmaceutical industry. That a very good decision made India today a pharmacy of the world, because and we are able to export hydroxychloroquines or paracetamol or other medicines to more than 140 countries around the world. Many countries we have simply give freely donated, not through the commercial deeds. And even the COVID medicine, before the second wave came, the COVID medicine manufacturer, the Atmanirbhar and India's own medicine, that is Covaxin, made by the Bharat Biotech, the AstraZeneca Oxford medicine of the Serum Institute of India, the famous Covishield. We exported this more than 80 million COVID vaccine were given to many countries, 60 countries, because we know that, of course, a few exports are related to our contractual obligation, few other obligations, but we did great service to the world. This was recognized by all multilateral organizations, whether it is WTO or WTO or WIPO. I remember the famous statement made by my friend and the former Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization, Francis Gurry, that talking about the COVID pandemic, these are extraordinary situations. We need to take extraordinary decisions. That's what the TRIPS IPR waiver has come into existence. This proposal has been floated basically with an objective to avoid barriers to the timely access of affordable COVID pharmaceutical products. This includes the vaccine, as Mr. Hari has explained, not only the vaccine, various COVID medicines, treatment medicines once the patient is infected, and various diagnostics and medical equipment, and to manufacture and scaling up the research and development manufacturing facilities, and improving the ramping up the supply chains, which are essential supply chains of all essential COVID medicines and products. This TRIPS waiver has to facilitate. I gave reason for one by one dismantling the various opposition to this. Thanks to the timely decision by the new US government to support the IPR waiver, they know the reason, what are the reasons behind this. That is the reason why the huge pharma industry, multinational industry protecting country has come down to support this, because as a chief negotiator for the Marrakech Treaty, to provide access to published works to the blind and visually impaired, till last moment the US and the EU countries did not support, especially the commercial availability of this class. We introduced all these beautiful provisions in Indian law before international treaty happened, and we took these provisions at the international level. So India has been forefront as a leader of the developing country, as a leader of the pharma industry, especially generic pharma industry, to promote public health. That was, best example is the Doha Round of Declaration. Coming to the various oppositions to these proposal, I'm surprised to say that one of the major opposition is, why can't you go on giving voluntary agreements? Examples have been given. The Indian-owned example, AstraZeneca, Oxford to Serum Institute of India. But many people do not know that voluntary agreement came with a lot of riders. It is not supposed to produce more than this. It is not supposed to fix below that price level, especially when it is exporting to such and such countries, and many middle income and high income countries have been taken out. So that is the big problem. So if these kind of voluntary agreements and licenses are going to be given, even though India has the capacity to manufacture, recently, various other, the pharmaceutical manufacturing units are popped up. India, I just give you the list of things. Not only the Serum Institute of India, which manufacturing Covishield, the version of AstraZeneca and Oxford vaccine, we have our own Bharat Biotech come out with the new innovative medicine vaccine called Covaxin. You all know that there are different varieties of vaccine. The first variety of vaccine is nucleic acid vaccine. Nucleic acid vaccines are two varieties, mRNA, messenger RNA based, and also DNA based. So we have mRNA technology, the same as Pfizer, which claims that age 12 and above can be vaccinated, and we have the other varieties as well, and Moderna, for instance. And then we have other variety of this nuclear, acid variety. Apart from mRNA, we have DNA variety. I would like to say proudly that only one company so far started DNA variety production. That is Zydus Cardila, the fourth largest generic company in India with a DNA messenger vaccine, that is Zycov D. That is soon, that's already started the trials, clinical trials. Soon it will come with a faster market approval by the government and other regulatory approval. So these are nuclear acid vaccines. Then we have vector-based vaccines, viral vector-based vaccines, and they're all already famous, like our Oxford AstraZeneca, Covishield, Indian-made Serum Institute of India, and we have Russian-made Sputnik, and also the famous Johnson and Johnson vaccine. And then we have third variety called inactivated virus. Best example, our own Atmanirbhar virus, Bharat Biotech, Covaxin. So the dead virus, inactivated virus is injected. So that is the technology. We have other medicines like Sinopharm of China and Sinovac of China, also the same technology based. And the fourth variety of these vaccines is protein-based, that is Novavax, a company of the US multinational drug pharma company they are prepared. There are four major things there in innovations and invention happening, and then few are following the same technology and few are not, and more must be there. And India, apart from that, the Bharat Biotech and the Jadula Cadila, we have biological E has come out with the biological E vaccine and various trials, and soon it will be out. And Dr. Reddy's and Hetero Biopharma, two pharma companies got the voluntary licensing from the Sputnik 5 vaccines. We have Genova doing this HGCO19 variety of vaccines, Manavax doing Manavax vaccine, and two other pharma companies like Hester Biosciences, Indian Immunologics also ventured into the vaccine research and R&D. So our capacity to manufacture is huge, but this voluntary license mechanism going to put a lot of conditions that is not going to help our purpose. No, there may be import restrictions, there may be export restrictions. Only this TRIPS waiver can solve the problem, as Mr. Hari has also mentioned about it has to address the import restrictions. I tell you, import restrictions came because the sooner India started manufacturing and scaling up the manufacturing of not only the Bharat Biotech Covaxin and Serum Institute of India Covishield started exporting, suddenly there was a ban on the raw material to be used for manufacturing goods. So even though you have voluntary license, there is a ban of raw material. Raw material includes not only the active pharmaceutical ingredients, API is a short form known as, there are other materials. Now, surprising to me, recently I come to know from a senior bureaucrat who worked in the WIPO, Pushpendra Roy, he shared some information that this raw material in US is subcontracted. For example, one raw material subcontracted the 4 stages. So finally, final products come to that, it has to pass through subcontracting of 4 stages, then only finished raw material is there. That can be made used in whether it's a messenger RNA based thing or this kind of viral vector kind of thing. So how to get that kind of raw material is a huge problem. Luckily, again, the Covaxin producer, Bharat Biotech, announced that, no, we will not depend on importing these raw material, whether active pharmaceutical ingredient or other things. We will start venturing into innovation and R&D to produce, improve our own Atmanirbharata in self-reliance in production of. That's what the new policy of the government of India promoting. Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi ji has announced that India should become Atmanirbhar in each and every production capacity, especially India relying on APIs and other raw material in other countries. The cheapest paracetamol production in India will be stopped if the API is not available to that from other countries. So that should not happen. That's what we are doing. So, and another important thing is the most strongly argued point against the IP waiver. Most surprisingly, that is the argument that a strong IP system will get damaged. That argument, is not going to be helping, because Dr. Haynes has already mentioned about the beautiful Article 7, which talks about the balancing of the right owner with the public interest. Public interest includes access to medicine and technology transfer, and so there is a balancing concept. The concept of balancing of IP rights is universal. It has been included in each and every intellectual property convention. Right from the Paris Convention of Industrial Properties, you take series of various copyright convention, from the Berne to the WIPO Internet Treaty, the recent Beijing Treaty, and of course TRIPS talks about Article 7 and 8 about access to medicine, and that is very, very important. And then another important thing about the more interesting thing, that there are TRIPS flexibility. The concept of TRIPS flexibility is going to help. You don't need any TRIPS waiver. That is totally false. Why? TRIPS flexibility has led to a concept of harmonization and also disharmonization. And every country interpreting each and every provision in a different manner. So India allowed compulsory licensing as per the Article 31 and got into trouble when it gave a compulsory licensing. Unfortunately, Menon Saab has not come. If he has come, the big salute to him. The famous next of bears, and entire world, all from IP student to IP lawyer to IP professor to IP negotiator, know how important for India to give this compulsory license. That is the only one compulsory license which put India in the priority watch list of the Super 301 report. And then we have another TRIPS flexibility which allows India not to allow evergreening of patents. So we have a section 3D which does not allow evergreening of patents. And then again we have a famous Supreme Court case of Gleevec medicine of the Novartis. Again, this put India in the priority watch list. Then the TRIPS plus TRIPS plus formulation called patent linkage. No, I don't want to go and explaining what patent linkage. You're all experts. You know that what patent linkage. This Indian courts in Bayer versus Union of India clearly said that harmonized reading, combined reading of provisions of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act and Patent Act provisions does not give a window of patent linkage in India. That is not allowed any. Again, lack of patent linkage put India in the priority watch list. And then we have the famous data exclusivity, undisclosed information. Article 39, paragraph 3 is interpreted by various countries in the various ways because flexibility is allowed. So that flexibility allowed the US, EU, Japan, China to introduce data exclusivity for the patent medicines, their clinical data for 5 to 10 years. Then India said, we interpret is no misappropriation of that should happen. No violation and no infringement of that data happens. Somebody comes out with a generic medicine, biosimilar, bioequivalent, and it's not infringement of that patent. And there are other countries follow the third model of the Article 39.3, that is compensation formula. Okay, there is R&D private investment into those kind of medicines, right? And then we'll compensate to such an extent which our country budget allows. That's what the three interpretations to that. But not including the data exclusivity per se in Indian law, patent law, India was put into the priority watch list. Then again, we have the beautiful provision of Article 6, that is exhaustion of intellectual property in the TRIPS. It says you can have international exhaustion, you can have regional exhaustion, you can have national exhaustion. But Indian patent law allows international exhaustion so that parallel import of, with the consent of the right owner, the consent of the innovator, the cheap medicines are entering India. That is again put in India into problem. And question comes, the recent voluntary licensing of famous remdesivir medicine of Gilead. Dr.
Raghvendraji, can I request you to conclude, please?
I think there is a crosstalk. Please switch off all of your mics, please. I just take 5 minutes. I'll be closing. So the Gilead remdesivir patent was under the Patent Cooperation Treaty. Patent was also granted to the Indian Patent Office, and compulsory license can be given to that. But but now compulsory license cannot be given to that because various voluntary licensing has been given. Various companies are manufacturing in India. So when recently, a batchmate of mine deals with these topics in the Department of Pharmaceuticals, and I came to know that the price fixation happens under the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority, National List of Essential Medicines. Because of COVID emergency, national emergency, prices have been fixed for the various generic manufacturers of this remdesivir and also the multinational patented products. So Zydus Cardula's remdesivir starts from 680 rupees, and and other multinational product price goes to 3,500. So this kind of price fixation happens. This regulation is pinching them the moment this kind of this is a big problem. That is the reason why I understood that Pfizer has not ended and Moderna has not ended. They said we are ready to come have voluntary agreements with not one or a couple of things. We'll ramp up the production of vaccine in India. There will be a huge supplies, and because India needs after the second wave, and a lot of vaccination is against our coming to India. That's what I read about this through other sources. But is this going to help us? This kind of methodology, there is a medicine patent pooling. People talk about patent pooling as an alternative to patent waiver. IPR waiver. With some examples have been given by Hari Subramanian. Again, I'm quoting him again and again. That the antiretrovirals of HIV medicine, and Gilead has granted under the medicine patent pool voluntary licensing. What kind of voluntary licensing? Not non-exclusive, non-transferable, a kind of FRAN licensing we experience in the standard essential patent. Fair, reasonable, and equitable licensing and non-discriminatory licensing they have given. So such a beautiful thing is existing. Why do you need a IPR waiver? But you can't give a compulsory license because, as Dr. Agarwal already mentioned, neither at Section 84, Section 92, or Section 100. This cannot be given because India has not granted. I don't have any record that Indian Patent Office granted patent to Pfizer, or Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson, or Novavax.
Raghavendraji, I have to interfere because I have to take care of the time, and I will give you more opportunity during the question answer session.
Yeah, I'm just concluding with 2 points. So these are the problems. Then coming to once this happens, so I'm a strong supporter of the TRIPS waiver. If a TRIPS waiver happens, see the entire history of the WTO. I take back to this is a last point, sir. In November 2001, the famous Doha Declaration happened. But in 2001, when it was officially approved by the General Council, it was after 2 years, 1st September 2003. When General Council approved, this has to become effective. To become effective, 2/3 of a TRIPS Council member has to approve. When was this approved? In 2017. 2017, this was done. Look at this date. Look at this date. And then finally, 2017, January, this happened. But not all countries approved this waiver. The famous 31 bis and paragraph 6 was approved. Paragraph 6, which promotes SIP and public health access to medicine policy, which we introduced. Paragraph 6 and 31. So what happened? 31 bis. So what happened here? They are given only 102 countries have supported. Many countries have not done. They are given time up to 31 December this year, 2021. If this kind of thing happens, despite consensus and textual negotiations, do you think this is going to happen? That's not my fear. Of course, TRIPS waiver is going to help because it's not only the patent involved, copyright, because there are copyright protection for various data pertaining to the clinical data, and there are non-patented things like trade secret coming to the manufacturing process and various other things. And then various medical equipment, DNA printing, all this happens, and industrial design exemption has to be, waiver has to be there. That is the reason why India included copyright, patent, industrial design, and undisclosed information. Article Section 7 also. That is the reason why.
No, we have heard Mr. Subramaniam. Please, we have heard Mr. Subramaniam, and we have also heard Mr. Raghavendra.
Yeah.
And we find that there are some difference of opinion between the perspective of two different persons from. So instead of going into further, I request Dr. Prabhuddha Ganguly to balance out the views expressed by Mr. Subramaniam and Mr. Raghavendra, because this is such an issue where we need to arrive at certain consensus, because as it is, the pandemic is so severe, and we need to find out some solution. And today's meeting is also to bring some consensus and to resolve the controversy. So I think Professor Ganguly can give realistic view, but though I agree with a lot of the issues and the points discussed by Mr. Raghavendra from his point of view on Article 7, on Article 39.3, on Article 6 about exhaustion. But let us have a practical view, because we have heard the legal side and the real difficult litigation side from Mr. Subramaniam, and the other side from Mr. Raghavendra. So let's hear from Professor Ganguly, so that we can have some balancing thing. Professor Ganguly, please.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be very brief, because we have already pretty late during the evening. I think the way we have to look at it is not A versus B. We all the time look at A versus B. We look at as if all these things are people who are pro-patent or anti-patent. No, we are not supposed to be looking at it that way. We have to look at it how we will come to a situation globally in a win-win situation for all. And that's what negotiations are all about. That is what the WTO platform is all about. And if we look at the TRIPS agreement, I start from there. We look at the TRIPS agreement and look at those articles of the TRIPS agreement which help us to come together rather than fall apart. So we need to really look at, so I will spend a few minutes. First, I will quote Article 7. And if you look at Article 7, what is the object of Article 7? It sets out to have IPR as an enabler. I think Heinz has already talked about this right at the beginning, that IPR is an enabler. It is not a pro or anti situation. It says IPR is an enabler for what? For promotion of technological innovation and to transfer and dissemination of technology, right, to the mutual advantage. Very important, to mutual advantage. It is not A versus B, it is mutual advantage. So the important part is to the mutual advantage of whom? The producers and users of technological knowledge. Very important, producers and users of technological knowledge. Now, how? In a manner conducive to social and economic welfare and to balance of rights and obligations. So if you read the Article 7, it sets out the spirit of the TRIPS agreement. And we have to look at it from that standpoint. So Article 7 is to be looked at holistically as an enabling clause or an enabling article. That's the first point. And therefore, in times, whether it is in times of pandemic or it is in otherwise, you have to look at TRIPS, the Article 7 as an enabler. That's the first part. Then I come to Article 8. What does Article 8 of the TRIPS agreement do, of the TRIPS do? Article 8 says addressing the needs to adopt measures. Please understand the word, very well crafted. Adopt measures necessary. Adopt measures necessary. Not just adopt measures necessary. To do what? To protect public health and nutrition and to promote what? Public interest in sectors of vital importance to the socio-economic and technological development. And if you look at it further, what does it say? Article 8 calls for appropriate measures provided very important, that they are consistent with the provisions of this agreement may be needed to prevent the abuse of intellectual property rights by right holders to resort to practices which unreasonably restrain trade, or adversely affect the international transfer of technology. So if you take and read Article 7 and Article 8 together, it sets the platform for a discussion, a very healthy discussion, a very positive discussion on this particular subject. So I would think that IPR waiver, if you take this concept of IPR waiver, what is the concept of IPR waiver? IPR waiver, according to me, does not mean give everything free of cost. It does not mean give everything free of cost. It means, what it ought to mean? It ought to mean that you look at the whole thing as a trade-related IPR package, where you bring in technology transfer, you bring in knowledge, you bring in access, you bring in raw materials, you bring everything in. And therefore, I think rather than fighting with each other with tangential thoughts, we need to converge into some converging approach. And this is what Heinz and Professor Heinz Goddard and myself have been discussing over the last few weeks, that how do we converge? How do we come into a situation of a win-win situation of producers and people of the technological knowledge and society? So how do we come to a more humanitarian, a more humane, what I would say, interpretation of the TRIPS agreement in a very pragmatic form? So that's the first part which I want to make. Therefore, it's not a fight between haves and have-nots. It's a cooperation. It's a, how do we work together? That's the point number one. Point number two, very important. At this stage, we have to think creatively on how do we create different models of licensing arrangements. So we need to come up with very creative models of licensing arrangements. So it is not that I give you the full package. It's like a buffet. You come to a buffet and pick up what you want and pay for it. Okay, so you share. So how do you create those benefit sharing arrangements? And therefore, according to me, the IPR package, we should come with some propositions of that type. And we have some ideas about that as well. Come to the point number three, and that is my last point essentially. The point number three is that today there's a lot of misunderstanding of the technological knowledge and other bits. In fact, very interestingly, people say that people have not filed patents in India. They have filed patents in India. How many of us know that patents actually have been filed? Most of us don't know about it. Now, you may do any amount of patent search, but you don't get access to it. So one of the thoughts is, can we come with a concept that we come to an international body like WIPO, for example, something that Heinz and myself have been talking about, at the international level, that can we think of a body like WIPO, for example, to put together some sort of a database of all, just as we talk in terms of standard essential patents. We're not talking about standards. We are not here about standards. We're talking about essential patents in the area of COVID, vaccines, equipment, and all these type of related things. Can we put together a database of that type, which is accessible globally to anybody who wants to take access? Why? Because Article 7 tells me that Article 7 is for dissemination of knowledge, for sharing of knowledge, etc., etc. So taking advantage of that, and we create something like that. So we create a thing of all the not standard essential, but essential patterns. Now, once you create something like this, then we can create a model where when people access this knowledge and use this knowledge, and we then create a friend-like structure, right? A friend-like structure. Now we need to think creatively. We have to think out of the box, not in a standard way. So can we come into a situation where when somebody uses that for the benefit of itself, to do something, to develop something further, or to go into production, or doing all that, what is the type of benefit sharing arrangements that we can come in, which is fair and non-discriminatory? So I think the time is right. The IPR waiver discussion, which is text-based, should bring these type of concepts on the table so that the global community can come together and actually share some of these thoughts and then come onto the table and say, well, if we do it this way, A, we solve the problem that we are setting out to solve. We are doing it in a win-win situation, and we are creating a framework, not just for this pandemic, but for all pandemics of the future. So with these few words, I'd like to end my presentation and say that it is a time now to think outside a standard way of thinking. Think outside the box. Put our minds together constructively and not against each other. And then come forth and say that here, IPR waiver is an opportunity, right? It's not a threat to anybody. It's an opportunity. Let's come together and use this opportune moment to really do something positive. With this, I shall end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ganguly, for a very precise, brief, and to the point, his views on converging the ideas so that the real problem can be resolved, because today the world is facing with the pandemic and we have to find out some solution which is agreeable by all the parties within the legal framework. You have nicely narrated the provisions of Article 7 and Article 8 of the TRIPS, and within the legal framework, how do we find out a solution? So far we have heard Mr. Subramaniam, Mr. Raghavendra, Professor Ganguly, and definitely we have been deliberating on the pertinent issue, and now we will hear our learned speaker from South Africa, because initially it is a drive from India and South Africa. So Mr. Owen Joseph, he would make his presentation from the South African perspective and how we can go with it. So over to Mr. Rowan Joseph. You have some presentation, so I enable you to make your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal. And I feel a bit overawed having to present in this august company with views that are expressed that are so passionate and high level. And I hope I'm not going to bring the tone down by representing my own views, which are not necessarily supported, as I say, by facts, but maybe my interpretation from a small country down south that's developing. And I'm just, if you'll bear with me, I'll just start my presentation. So because of time constraints, I might not dwell too much on each of the slides, but just to give you an overview, we are relatively small population compared to India, 60 million. We've had about 55,000 deaths. Our target is to vaccinate 40 million South Africans by February 2022, and thus far we've vaccinated fully less than 0.8%, so less than 1% of our population has been vaccinated, despite a very high mortality rate for Africa. We need to do about 190,000 shots a day, and I think we're standing at about 80,000. So for us, the situation is not very rosy. You'll see that we've actually got massive health cut reductions planned for the next 3 years. And in real terms, we're going to be spending less per healthcare user than we did 2 years ago. So I think the picture that I'm trying to paint here is that we as a country cannot really afford vaccination. And I think it's with that in mind that a problem has been targeted. And I think the apparent problem is that patents, well, the problem is that patents have been identified as part of the problem, or a large part of the problem. And I think hence the TRIPS waiver. So it's not just the TRIPS waiver, but with the idea being that patents are the problem, I think we can identify in South Africa 3 solutions to this problem, and I'll look at them each briefly in place. The one is fixing the patent laws, and I've said fixing in inverted commas, the issue of compulsory licenses, and then, of course, the TRIPS waiver. So just looking at fixing the patent laws, we have a coalition called the Fix the Patent Laws Coalition, which has called for various reforms. Of course, it's calling for to ensure all the legal flexibilities of TRIPS are included in new laws, a moratorium on granting patents related to COVID and COVID-related products, and automatic compulsory licensing of COVID-related healthcare, etc. We've also got 80 academics who wrote to our president asking for strengthening of patentability criteria, providing for substantive examination, presumably so that patents are not granted as easily as it appears that they are, and to again also adopt flexibilities under the TRIPS agreement. So what are the problems with this, in my view? Well, legislation takes long to process. Our laws still need to comply with TRIPS, and substantive examination is not going to stop vaccine or drug patents being granted. I think there's this view that we wouldn't have these patents granted if it was for this. So the fixing the patent law is in my view not a quick fix. It's not going to help us vaccinate 190,000 people a day by February next year. It's not going to get anywhere close to providing us with a solution to the current problem of vaccinating our population. So what about compulsory licenses then? I don't need to go into these. We have the standard abuse or lack of supply provisions. I'm guessing as a former British colony ourselves, our provisions are very similar to those in India. And we also have the provision for the state to use patents under a compulsory license, or to take them over in the case of emergency. It is a TRIPS compliant provision, and I think it conforms to the Doha Declaration. I want to just remind you, you might remember that in 2001, the US experienced anthrax attacks, and I say only 3 people died. It was 3 people. There were deaths. It wasn't 3 million people, or what we're experiencing now, but still there was a raging debate about waiving Bayer's ciprofloxacin patent. You'll remember maybe that the US eventually negotiated a deal with Bayer. What you might not remember is that Canada, in fact, issued a compulsory license to Apotek, but they were later forced, I think through public opinion or through world pressure, to make a U-turn. But what I draw from this is that where it's a case of death and health at stake, that emotions are powerful drivers, and that we'll grasp at these opportunities to try and protect our population. So it's not unusual to be able to look at compulsory licenses as a solution. The question is why these have never been used in South Africa, even during our HIV/AIDS crisis. And I've given it some thought, and because it seems to me the logical answer. But I think it's possibly due to economic pressure from the first world. Both Harry and Mr. Ravenda mentioned being placed on watch lists and economic pressure. And I think as a nation, India is able to resist those kinds of pressures much more easily than a developing country, which is much more dependent on the goodwill of our trade partners, especially the US and the Europeans. And I thought maybe we could take a lesson from the AIDS pandemic. In 1998, South Africa enacted changes not to its patent regime, but to medicines control regime, which was to permit parallel importation of medicines. And this was heavily opposed by the US pharmaceutical industry, backed by the US government, which resulted in South Africa being put on the special 301 watch list by the US trade representative. So that came close to imposing unilateral trade sanctions by the US on South Africa, which could have been devastating. And the US trade representative used its discretion to withhold trade benefits, etc. The policy changed with the Bush administration in the early 2000s, and they vowed to support poorer countries gain access to essential medicines. The case was dropped in 2001 by the US pharmaceutical companies, excuse me. But interestingly, parallel importation has never been used. So we've got these provisions for doing parallel imports of drugs into South Africa, but never been used. It could be that that the drug companies eventually conceded on the AIDS drugs, but I think a lesson was maybe learned, or a big finger was waved at South Africa, and heed was taken that if we are going to choose this route, that there might be consequences more severe than we'd like to deal with. So possibly, for me, this is the reason that instead of looking to this homegrown solution, we've, as a country, opted for the TRIPS patent waiver. I don't need to go through this information. You already know it, that there's no real solution in sight, that it's going to be a long time before anything happens. As we heard, it took all of 16 years to get the Doha Declaration approved. So I don't think the TRIPS waiver is going to be, again, necessarily the silver bullet that solves our problems. And trying to sum up what I see as the problems with all the approaches, so fix the patent laws, compulsory licensing, TRIPS, it's too long. It's going to take too long. TRIPS consensus might take years if it doesn't take months. Compulsory licenses are still going to be subject to negotiation and court ratification, even if handled early. So we can't just unilaterally impose a license. It has to be ratified by the court if the patentee doesn't accept the conditions. It's going to take too long. We're going to get herd immunity in our country, I think, the hard way. And then what of the mutation? So if we succeed on being able to produce a vaccine, what happens then with the mutations? Will that the same apply? Will we have to be going through the same process again? How does one force, as we've heard before, technology transfer and transfer of know-how? That hasn't been answered. More importantly as importantly for us, and it's a problem that was alluded to by Harry, but one which is severe for us, which is manufacturing capacity. We are one of only 5 countries in Africa which has capacity to produce vaccines, and we only have 2 potential entities that could produce it. One is Aspen, a private pharmaceutical company, and the other is BioVac, which is a public-private partnership. Now, Aspen has an agreement with J&J to compound 400 million vaccines in 4 manufacturing plants. So one could say maybe, yes, there you have something reasonable, but surely they're going to be out of the picture due to their agreement with J&J. I'm sure that's capacity for them. And for them to opt out of that agreement wouldn't make commercial sense, at least. BioVac, on the other hand, can only develop bacterial vaccines and has limited capacity. So I don't think that's an option for us. We haven't produced a vaccine in South Africa in over 20 years. So we have a significant skills gap. We've also got a lack of R&D and investment in new technical production methods because vaccines are typically cost less to import. So assuming we took a bold move and said, well, we're going to build our own facilities, how long would that take? It took BioVac 13 years to get their facility right for vaccine production. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's the case in an emergency, but it's certainly not going to happen overnight. And I also think that a facility would probably cost more than we would be willing to spend on the vaccine. So what happens to the facility after the pandemic has passed? Is it going to be competitive against Indian manufacturers? Probably not. And we also have a lack of skilled personnel to run such a facility. The next problem that we will have, which is not an insignificant one, is regulatory hurdles. How long, if we started manufacturing our own vaccine, how long to obtain regulatory approval? Again, just as an example, it took us 5 years to approve our first biosimilar. Again, I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily the case in an emergency like this, but certainly it's not going to happen within weeks or months. And then we've got an underrated problem, in my view, which are the logistics. We have a large rural population in remote locations. I think a similar issue applies in India. For us, simply transporting vaccines and storing them in the rural areas, I think will be a problem. And then we're going to have personnel to administer these vaccines, which will drain our already stretched healthcare system. So my view on it is that the barriers to vaccine self-sufficiency are more economic than IP related. So even in the most positive case, let's assume there were no patents blocking us and we had all the know-how. How long would it take for us to set up viable manufacturing facilities and obtain approval? I don't think that would happen within months. I think it's more likely years. And I think I said, as South Africa is one of 5 countries that can manufacture in South Africa or has the potential to manufacture, it's so much worse in other African countries. So a TRIPS waiver, I think, to them would mean even less than it would mean to us in South Africa. So it seems to me, and as I said, this is my personal views, that patents are being used as a whipping boy for economic and logistical problems, and that the TRIPS waiver is not necessarily as important for us as it's made out to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for giving your perspective about the TRIPS waiver. And now we will get a summarized and concluding views along with his personal views by our chief guest this evening, Professor Dr. Hans Godard. So I request Hans to please give his talk.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll try to be brief. It has been fascinating to listen, and I would like to start with my dear colleague, Hari Subramanian. There is not a sheet of paper which would fit between your opinion and my opinion as expressed with regard to the importance and what has to be done by the patent system and can be done. What my dear friend Prabhuda Ganguly said, pointing and putting together particularly Article 7 and 8 of TRIPS, this is exactly the instrument by which intellectual property, innovations first, transformed into intellectual property, can be packaged by patents and made tradable goods, which then fit into all the mechanisms of TRIPS. This is why we have TRIPS in the GATT, in the GATT. Otherwise, it would not belong there. The connection between intellectual property provisions and the whole general agreement on trade and tariffs is Article 7 and 8, how to package innovations into something which can be traded across borders between parties and whatsoever. Otherwise, we would have here's the legal world, here's the commercial world, and it would never work. Particularly, I have also liked one remark by Hari Subramanian. I come to that, and it is connected to what I have heard by the very, very valuable comments by Mr. Raghavendra, I hope I speak the name correctly, on the various functions which the Indian patent law comprises already and which help in the situation to make vaccines available and other medicaments to everybody. There is one thing, I think, first of all, India, South Africa, everybody, if the country has the necessary political strength and willingness. Look at China, for example, which possibly might not be such a good example if I speak to Indian friends. They would laugh about certain attempts which are made by countries, I don't know where, not in Europe at least, in relation to what they should give in and where they should give in. If you have the market, which is interesting for the industrialized world, and India certainly has this, you can use all freedoms which TRIPS gives. And there, compulsory licensing is of tremendous importance, and I think each and every country has the possibility to use the generous compulsory licensing flexibilities of TRIPS and also to use the public use order like in Article 13 of German Patent Act, where the government can very quickly give a permittance to use all patents necessary for the safety and the well-doing of the Federal Republic of Germany. It was only used once. That was in 1973. We had the first world oil crisis. Germany was cut off practically from Arabic oil because OPEC imposed more or less a sanction, a boycott on Europe and other countries. And Germany made a deal with the Soviet Union to import Siberian gas into Germany. Very simple deal. Germany would deliver the pipes and gas stations, compressing stations, which are necessary for that. And the compressing devices could only be made by a German company, AEG Candice. At that time, you can read this all in the books, under a license of General Electric. And General Electric said, no, we don't allow you because our government doesn't allow us to allow this, to export these devices into Soviet Union, because we don't wish, how familiar this is nowadays when we talk about Nord Stream 3. We don't wish Germany to become dependent on Soviet Union gas. We were dependent on Arab oil, but they didn't care. So Germany said, in 1 week, we have the permittance, or otherwise we will impose a public use order according to Article 13. And it was for a non-sovereign country at that time. This was in the occupied area of Germany. We were not united yet. It was a very courageous approach. And of course, the permittance came. Reasonable parties always agree. There came the license and we could build the pipelines. And now we are building the third and fourth, etc. All these things. So the instruments are there. But one thing I think is missing in India, if I may just particularly say this also for the attention, I think, of this wonderful and completion picture which we heard from Mr. Raghavendra. You said, Mr. Hari Subramanian, that we cannot patent medical use, second medical use patents in India, of course, and not certain medicaments, I know this very well, which don't show the necessary efficacy, etc., of the improvements. I appreciate that, from my opinion at least, India wanted to avoid evergreening by this, which is a good consideration. And I know of many attempts of dear friends of mine in big pharma worldwide who try to use this for evergreening. But what one has overlooked is that it's also the easiest possibility for an Indian company, for another company, small company even, to concentrate R&D on improvements of existing patented technologies and drugs and whatsoever, to patent them and get a secondary patent on these developments. And if you have that, then you can do what Germany, for example, does, absolutely TRIPS compliant. We have in our compulsory licensing provisions, Article 24 in Germany, a normal TRIPS compliant compulsory license in Article 24.1. You need public interest to be checked, etc. Complicated, takes a long time, blah, blah, blah. But Article 24.2 says, if somebody develops an important improvement of a patented technology and patents it, he has as a title of right not to be checked against public interest, the right to get a license under the primary patent. So you improve. Second, medical use patents are a very easy way to improve. You have a patent on this, and you go to the buyers or Novartis or Pfizer of this world and says, I wish a compulsory license, and they must give it to you. It comes at a price, as a cross license. That means you give a license under the improvement is a deblocking provision to make this improvement available. And India is depriving, from my viewpoint, I'm trying to convince many scientists, scholars, colleagues, politicians, when I talk with Indian people, you should remove this. You deprive your own industry, the smaller the more, from getting this provision used for obtaining permission to use patents and technologies which you would like to use in India. If you would introduce that, you would just work on improved vaccines. You would, like in Central Essential Patents, you would work on improving the standards. You would get patents on it. You would fully rightly, under a similar provision, which also exists, I think, under Indian law. I don't know the exact provisions there, but Russia has it, Britain has it, we have it in Germany, and you would give then a cross license, which does not necessarily come payment free. No, there can be a balancing stream of royalties into either or both directions to take care of the various merits of the inventions, the primary and the secondary ones. So my appellation would be a big call to the government of India to consider this, whether this should not be possible. One might possibly restrict it. There can be an abuse, of course, if it is done by the owner of the primary patent. And then comes the secondary, the tertiary, whatever patents, third, fourth, fifth, medical use, evergreening. The risk is at least there. But one could, for example, say if it is somebody independent of the owner of that primary patent and makes that improvement, then there could be this possibility. That is law to be developed, but these are my considerations. Otherwise, I think we have seen in the whole discussion here, I would not like to leave out any of these contributions, also not from South Africa, from me, which is a clear indication, of course, what political pressure can do with a small country. Sorry, it is a big country, South Africa, but I mean, there is not this power of a country like India or People's Republic of China or European countries behind it who would say and would simply say, no, we don't do this. So this is not possible. Yeah, but otherwise, the legal provisions are there. Then it comes the political game, and I think Germany will be always, I'm not a member of the government, of course not, I have the pleasure from time to time to give a little bit of advice to certain politically active, let's say, players in Germany. And I think they would be always on the side of people who would use the flexibilities which are in TRIPS embedded and which can be used and should be used to make vaccines available worldwide under really, I would say, locally affordable prices. And Germany would not play against this. There are other considerations for Germany at the moment not to move or try to move the European Union to approve to a totally free waiver of intellectual property rights, because I remember, again, I come back and I would like to stop with this, to the question of royalty streams under already existing agreements, where it might well be that if there are no patents anymore, no royalties anymore, and all the investments made by small companies sometimes, like BioNTech in Germany, like CureVac, whatsoever, into R&D, all of a sudden would become available for free for their big licensees in other countries, sometimes across the Atlantic. So this is just my view of the whole thing, and it would be much better to have no export restrictions. Do you know, probably you all know, that a company like Pfizer, a company like Johnson & Johnson, who have German manufacturing sites, who produce under these cooperation agreements, for example, in the case of Pfizer with BioNTech, but Johnson & Johnson the same, they don't have the right, or technically it is impossible to make the final vaccines into bottles, into syringes that has to be transported in containers into United States, has to be filled into syringes there, and they are under full US patent control, and they can export control, and they cannot be exported into Germany, for example, etc., where the stuff has been made and invented originally. The export restrictions are the problem. And do you see any indication in this sudden approval by the Biden government in the United States or Biden administration, that export restrictions would be softened? Not at all. The stuff sits in the United States. I understand America first, why they do this, but if every country does the same, we could all do this, and that would be the end of a worldwide ending of the pandemic. This is the problem. Thank you so much. I would not like to, I know this is all recorded here, but I'm fortunately not in public service. I'm totally independent as a professor and also as a senior partner in my own firm. So these are my personal opinions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Professor Heinz Godard, for your dynamic and very lively discussion and deliberation. And I hope that all the participants are getting enlightened with your very, very experienced and expert views. Now, may I request if Dr. Alpesh Pathak is here? Otherwise, we will open the house for interaction, question answer. So I think that Dr. Alpesh could not make it, and Mr. P.S. Korean just sent me a message because of some sudden problem at his house. He could not make it. So now we have about 25 minutes in hand, and we can have the interaction amongst. We have very, very learned participants, and they can just give their brief introduction, just name and the organization, and they can raise the question. They can mention it to whom they are addressing the question to professor, because we had 4 speakers and all the 4 speakers are here. So, I mean, including Professor Heinz Godard, we have 5 people. So you can just address your question and make your point clear. So over to you. Just raise your hand and unmute yourself and raise your question. Anybody?
Anuradha ma'am, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. It was an excellent enlightening session, and clarified a lot of issues. But just out of curiosity, Mr. Raghavendran or anyone, any of the experts present over here, could you all just throw light on the kind of waiver parameters, if at all, were discussed at the WTO in the negotiations?
Okay, Anuradha.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, Raghavendra ji, you would answer, or who would like to answer, Professor Ganguly? Raghavendra ji, aap. Mr. Raghavendra?
I don't think the discussions have come to that stage where these parameters, so that is precisely what is going to be discussed in the next meeting. But I don't think the discussion has come to that stage. So whatever Anuradha has asked is still pending. That is the clarification that I would like to give to the extent that I know of what went on in the discussion. Maybe Heinz knows a bit more, but that is what I am aware of.
Thank you. That's what I suspected. Yeah.
Maybe I can add the following. I don't know the content of the discussion. I know that there is big disagreement between the member countries, between inside the European Union, even the member countries. Certain countries have different opinions than Germany, for example. I know the German position pretty well, but I don't know how it is going on. I will following week meet people in Berlin in the Ministry of Economy, and we will talk about this again, because they think always that some people outside of the ministry know a little bit about IP, and that is just the reason. I can't say more. But one thing I should not forget when I talk, particularly when I hear my friend Prabhuda Ganguly speaking, I think his proposal to create a depository for all that sacred know-how, technologies, whatever, which is not in the patent, which practically, as Big Pharma, for example, says itself, is necessary to make the vaccines. That should be in a publicly accessible, I say publicly under control, of course, accessible depository, like we have it for biological material in Budapest, for example. If there is a biotech invention which only can exercise whether it works, how good it is, if you get material, you go there under control of WIPO, at the end of the day, of United Nations, you get some material, you can work on this. We should have this for all this know-how, which is apparently necessary, if I believe Big Pharma and the producers, to make vaccines really, in addition to what is in the patents, because if otherwise you can't use the patents, these patents are invalid. They don't give any enabling disclosure. You need something else, which apparently the patentee has, knows, did not publish, and is somewhere. So we should have a controlled, WIPO controlled, maybe public depository for all this know-how beyond the patents, which is necessary. And then under WIPO control, under WTO control, you can get access there too. And only then you can use the patents, which don't help as such, plus, and Prabhuda and I have talked about this, plus the know-how which you get from there. Only then you are really enabled to make these vaccines and medicaments, etc. And I think WIPO is talking about this. We have been in a dialogue with Darren Tang already, the DG coming from Singapore, as you know, being very much, I would say, familiar with the problems, particularly also of emerging countries and the developing world. I think that should be done. We all must be very careful, sorry to be so explicit now, that this deposit then does not come into certain countries like in ICANN, where the domain name administration, without any reasonable reason, did not come under WIPO control and under international control thereby, but had to be, because of the insistence of one member country, to be deposited somewhere across the Atlantic with all the informations, domain names, and whatever is there. It should be really an international depository, which keeps the segments, which cannot be just jumped in by somebody, not because of the wish of one country, but under controlled conditions, maybe under the same conditions under which compulsory licensing is granted, under a patent which allegedly cannot be exercised because of lack of this know-how, and then you should automatically get also by the same decision of whatever international body, you could get access to this depository also. This would not only apply, by the way, to pharma know-how, etc. It would be the same for data collections, for example. You need to exercise AI-related patents and whatsoever. But this is a different story for another day. But we talked about this, and I think we should promote this idea further, Prabhu, and everybody else. Thank you.
In fact, just to add what Heinz just mentioned, that we have been discussing for the last few weeks, also possible technologies that we can use from artificial intelligence, like blockchain and others, to bring in these controls and yet bring in access. So there is a lot of discussion going on. And Heinz and myself have been very actively involved in this particular discussion at various international fora, primarily WIPO and WTO.
So Raghavendra ji, Mr. Raghavendra, yeah.
The textual negotiation is yet to begin, and whatever textual negotiations happen, the language is agreed. There is a process of consensus, and this consensus text has to facilitate, number one, technology transfer, ramping up the production, opening up the supply chain without any an easing up of restrictions and regulations for either export and even import. and also these things should be universally be addressed to not only the manufacture of vaccines, but also other COVID medicines, including diagnostic equipment and whether it is a processes. That's what the definition in the text definition for the pharmaceutical product. It's very open-ended definition. It includes all items which I'm mentioning about, including the active pharmaceutical ingredients and other raw material required for production of vaccines and medicine. If if this is one end, once the text is finalized, consensual text, and it should, what I understand, it should be a mandatory provision. It should not be optional provision. If it is an optional provision, and countries will opt out. I'm a negotiator. Look for that kind of thing when the public interest is involved. If it is not a shell provision, it's not going to help. Then the countries like India, South Africa, China, South Korea, maybe Mexico and Brazil, they should get ready to identify their own manufacturing units which have the sufficient, not only the capacity to manufacture, which includes the infrastructure, the scientists, the technicians, and other facilities. The manufacturing and pharmaceutical industries with to do that, so that they will take up this challenge of with the targets to achieve the target. So the vaccination should be completed in the less and less period. Otherwise, the entire the purpose of universal vaccination has to be completed within 3 years, because the waiver is going to be for 3 years, and that should be for the vaccination, because the pandemic is not going to end in 3 years. In small packets, it may come and go. So despite vaccination, so we need medicine. So how this has to be addressed? This also has to be clearly mentioned there. So there are a lot of issues are there. Let's see how it's going to take.
Okay, thank you. We also have Corwin Sekil from Basf Chemical. Would you, sir, like to say a few words? Corwin, are you there? From Basf. I'm able to see your name, but I don't know whether you are present now or not. Otherwise, I'll request Mr. Hari Subramaniam to say a few words.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal. I think it was a very, very nice, exhaustive discussion today. And I must say that it was a pleasure for me to hear lots of unbiased and very honest views and see two sides of the coin. And of course, Dr. Heinz Godard and I, Rowan, we all are practicing attorneys. So therefore, we do have a little bit of legal arguments in our views, but based on facts and our own experience, of course. And then it's such a pleasure to hear somebody like Mr. Raghavendra, I think, which I find very, very important, because such a senior government official, it's not easy for someone like him to express a view separate from the government and yet express a view which is so balanced and so correct and so enlightening. And it was a really pleasure. So, and we understand that at this point of time, like Dr. Ganguly said, the idea is not to argue from one side or other, but to find a solution to the existing problem. But having said that, I would agree that to find a solution, you need to hear strong arguments from both sides. Only then a judge will be able to arrive at a middle path and a good solution where justice is delivered to everybody, all stakeholders, players, public, everyone. So I think you put up together a very good panel, Dr. Agarwal, practitioners, professors, government officers, everybody, and we all expressed views which we believe in. And what has emerged at the end of the discussion today is that IPR is important. At the same time, it is also important to make sure there is no abuse of monopoly right. And the most important thing is to balance the IPR rights and reward to the inventors with the requirements for the public and their needs. And the governments have very important roles to play. And that way, I am quite proud of the Indian government in the sense that it has taken views, sometimes has taken drastically, I would say, very courageous views, which would invite a wrath. And like like Mr. Raghavendra said, we have been placed under Super 301 watch list several times, particularly when Condoleezza Rice was in charge. I think we were always on the watch list, 301 and Super 301. But we weathered all that and we have been able to hold on our own. And it was also encouraging. I could not talk about some of the great vaccine developments that has happened in India by several companies like Zydus Cadila. For the simple reason I represent them, I was involved in their patent matter, and therefore I'm bound by a certain degree of confidentiality. But I must say that there are some amazing vaccine developments which are happening in India as well. But those are by a handful of pharma companies. We need to go far, far beyond. So is a question of dealing with this pandemic, which is not going to go away in the next 3-4 years, certainly. And if you really look at the sheer population that we have today, I think by my estimate, it's going to take about 80 years to vaccinate everybody. And by that time, I do not even know whether the person who got vaccinated first still will have the efficacy of the vaccine. We do not know. But hopefully, we will have better vaccines coming in. So I think balancing the IPR rights with the public interest is the need of the day. And it would call for very careful, very all-pervasive, all-inclusive negotiation between the countries to reach a consensus. Unfortunately, with 160 countries involved, this is something that cannot happen in a day. But we only hope that everybody will keep in mind the raging pandemic and try to find a solution as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for summarizing and analyzing and a very practical side of how we can resolve the problem. Sasank Moria, the former additional director general from ICAR, and the person behind formation of the plant variety bill in the country. So I can request him to give his point of view. Dr. Sasank Moria.
First of all, let me thank you, Dhanpatji, for informing me about this discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed each and every input that was given today. As I see, the multi-pronged approach of Government of India is outstanding. Over time, bilateral treaties and agreements have also become important over and above the multilateral treaties. Thus, the Government of India, on one side, is producing vaccines, trying to vaccinate as much as possible. License technology like of Covaxin, which is India, sublicensing to Shield Covaxin, making arrangements for that. At the same time, negotiating with other or from everything is happening. So its multi-pronged approach is really something that is really very good from the perspective of a developing country, which can also lead many countries as it's happening for leading the issue of IPR waiver. See, is not going to be easy, and it will be getting delayed. Today's economic time that probably European Union will delay it a bit. It gave an indication. It did not say it directly. But my question over and above this is one more. I want to ask somebody to tell why it for the waiver all come together in China. Forget about China, forget about Russia, Brazil. Why did Brazil not come with India and Russia, India and South Africa? The short answer from my side is that for issues and technology development and acquisition, it cannot be firefighting at the last 11th hour. We need to have a long-term plan. Just now said it will take 8 years. It was said that COVAX servant, but I so also. I mean, the short point is, while the multi-pronged approach is so very good, considering the developing country status of India, at the same time, within India, we need to think rationally on a long
Dr. Moria, your voice is cracking, but what I have been able to gather from your statement is that Government of India should have a long-term perspective.
Yes.
It should not just go on a firefighting basis. There has to be a long-term plan because health is a very crucial issue.
Absolutely.
And we cannot just, look at the trips and for getting concessions. We should be proactive in our research. We should be ready to spend for the innovation. This is what is the requirement for the, long-term basis. We have to have our own health infrastructure. Not only a question of just medicines, it's also the question of hospitals, the skilled health workers, then the medical devices. It's a very integrated and comprehensive plan where India government has to, or so to say, all the developing country has to, after this corona, the health will become a priority issue. So everybody has to be concerned, should take a integrated view. Now, can I request Ron Joseph to say a few words in his concluding remarks? Joseph, you want to say something?
I'm overawed. Thank you, Dr. Agarwal. It's been great, and particularly informative to hear the views by Dr. Ganguly and Prof. Godda, that it's not just a scrap down below, that there's almost an overhaul of the whole system that's been looked at, which I think is a great. It would be a great result if we could achieve that. But in the meantime, I'm wondering, what is the short-term solution to we're in our third wave, and nowhere closer to an answer. So it all becomes a bit academic until we actually get something in our hands. However, we get it. And I think at the moment we're at the mercy of our politicians, but it's nice to be able to say something, and thank you for entertaining me.
Okay, thank you. So just last one request, if anybody from the participants have any question, so one last question we can take and thereafter we will conclude our today's session. So Rich Coach or anybody, I'll love to have one question from the audiences. Anyone?
Hi.
Very quick. Yeah.
I have a question. My name is Priyam. May I pose my question?
Yeah, Priya, please. Yeah. Priyam.
Thank you. Thank you all the speakers for their presentation. I have one question for Mr. Raghavendra and one question for Professor Godar. For Mr. Raghavendra, I understand that the TRIPS waiver text-based negotiation is still to commence, but assuming that the text goes as is, how would the waiver be implemented at the national level? I asked Rowan also the same question. I would want to understand how India would want to go about it. And the question to Professor Godar is, there are several TRIPS flexibilities that the countries can use, but what do the countries do when the developed countries are posing a condition that the developing countries should not grant a compulsory licenses if they want their vaccines? This is what we are seeing in case of India as well, where reportedly US is trying to say that India should not issue a compulsory license. So what do you think countries should do in those circumstances apart from asking for a waiver? Thank you.
Can we take another one question and then finally we can get the answer? Manju Sarjekar, you have anything to say? You have raised your hand, Manju. Yes, please. Maybe you have just raised the hand. Anuradha, you have anything more to say? Because I find the hands raised.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have anything.
All right. So finally, then I
have one
the answer.
Professor, I have one question.
Yeah.
This is Raja Venkateshan from Chennai.
Okay.
I have one question because in India we are always depending upon the private sector as far as the manufacture of vaccine is concerned. Why not we boost the government sectors also to concentrate more on it and invest huge amount so that we can come up with the more vaccine? Because this is the risk of life, because many of us we are facing that we don't know when the people will get vaccination. And instead of boosting the private sector, the true in India also, and why not you got more fund? Because even in our places also, the vaccination industry is already closed, because there are two places in Tamil Nadu also, in Chengalpattu as well as the Kunnur, and already they had invested, and but they are not concentrating more on it. I would like to ask this question with Raghavendra.
Okay. Yeah. So Raghavendra ji, he has asked why government is not making more investment in.
So at the beginning, I already told you that I'm not representing government, and the concerned departments have to take a decision, policy decision. I'm not in those departments, whether it is a health or pharmaceutical or concerned department. And as a citizen, I can say that, what I understand, and government is already focusing on various aspects of ramping up the production of vaccines and strengthening the supply chain. But at the various levels, this has to be efficiently administered without indulging any wastage of vaccines. That is very, very important. And already listed out that various pharmaceutical companies, mostly private sector, involved in the production, and the more licensing are being given to other units to ramp up the production. Hopefully, this will the present policy will improve the condition of vaccination, and further improvement will obviously come once the TRIPS waiver comes. And then coming to the compulsory license, present provisions, even the 31 bits will not help giving the compulsory license for export purposes, as there are because the provision itself, the paragraph 6 provision itself, comes with a lot of conditions. So that is not sufficient unless and until a waiver is given. And waiver will help, hopefully, to make the production and also the manufacturing, production, supply of all pharmaceutical products required for the managing the COVID pandemic.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for valuable. Thank you, sir.
So we have heard the views of all the learned speakers. We have also heard the views and the questions from our participants. And now is the time that we take the concluding view of the House. And I think the House is of the consensus that number one, production of vaccine is not similar to production of the drugs and the medicines. So even if a waiver is granted or a license is granted, it is very difficult for a pharmaceutical company. So they must have all the biosafety measures and all the precautions and all the infrastructure facility to manufacture the vaccines, because as Mr. Subramaniam has said, it may prove to be a monster otherwise. So one has to be very, very careful. That is number one about the vaccines and the drugs. Number two is that since this is a big pandemic, so therefore we have to go out of box. We cannot just maintain the rigidity of the law and the technicality. We have to be flexible, and we have to see how we can resolve the problem for the humanity, because every day people are dying. So we cannot allow a situation where we have, on the one hand, the profit maximization point of view, on the other hand, the people are dying. We have to have a trade-off and a middle path, as Mr. Subramaniam has said. And well, we will have enough time. If the human civilization survive, we can make profit also. But yes, we cannot, as Professor Ganguly said, there cannot be technology transfer, there cannot be a transfer of the knowledge without gain. So some equitable consideration has to be paid. So in conclusion, a balanced approach has to be taken. We cannot just take a very authoritarian or a very commanding type of view. We have to take a very flexible and a compromising and a balanced approach, so that the innovator company also get the reward. The waiver, if at all, should be for a limited period and for a limited area. It cannot be just open. It has to be within certain parameters, so that the innovators companies are not punished because they have to spend a lot, and we have to also incentivize them for the future innovation. So the process of innovation has to go along with the rewarding formula. So that is the thing. And today, I think by and large, all the WTO member countries should find out and sit together and find out, and the solution should be quick. It should not be prolonged, because everybody is feeling that the process of decision making in the WTO is very, very long process. But this is not the issue where we can take long time. We have to take a humanistic approach, and we have to resolve the issue as quickly as possible, because if we delay, as we said, justice delayed is justice denied. So similarly here, if the decision is delayed, then the people will keep on dying. And by the time we come out with it, because the rule says that nobody is safe unless everybody is safe. So everybody has to be vaccinated. And for that purpose, before the third waves or the fourth wave attack us, and before our children are attacked, I think we should take a very prompt and very quick action on this. So I think broadly, these are the issues which we have discussed, and what I could gather from the views expressed by all the learned speakers. So with these remarks, I convey my heartiest thanks to all of you for making the contribution of your knowledge and wisdom. And this is a kind of what we say in Upanishad, a jnana yajna. So everybody has contributed their knowledge and wisdom for dissemination. So we will take this message further forward, because earlier also on the 7th May 2021, we had one GIPC conference, but that was very beginning, because at that time India had not affected so much, and by now, since the 8th, 9th TRIPS Council meeting has also taken place, so at least we have been able to discuss something more in detailed form. So with this, I will hope that the TRIPS Council, with their conscience, take a very quick decision and the humanity gets relief. So thank you all once very much. And with this Shanti mantra, I would like to conclude. The Shanti mantra goes, Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukbhag Bhavet, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. That is peace, peace, and peace. So let everybody be happy. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Namaskar and good night.
Namaskar, Jai Hind, and good night to all of you. Stay safe and take care.
Likewise, sir.
Likewise.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal.
Yeah, Professor Hans Godar, especially for spending such a long time together. And to everybody for staying together, Mr. Subramaniam, Mr. Raghavendra. Oh, Dr. Hirwani, how are you, sir?
Fine, fine, thank you.
Okay, Tarvez Ahmed. Yes. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for organizing it, bringing us together.
आपसे भी कुछ सुनना चाह रहे थे हम.
सुनिए अगली बार बोलेंगे.
Okay. All right. Thank you all very much. So I am concluding now.